Hey guys, this is Professor Dykstra, and we are getting ready for our next unit on Plato. And I would love to see anything you learned from this lecture to get into your final draft of your paper on Plato. And whatever you learn from this should be added in the color of blue. Plato and education have a long, rich history, and you, as educators, would probably do good to drink in some of that. If anything in this lecture is good or helpful to you, I highly encourage you. There's a lot of other free lectures out there, and if you really get into them, you should really start reading them more. I know you're going to read 2 selections for class, but he's rich. There's a reason why we keep bringing him back up 2,300 years later. So this is probably one of the more famous pictures about him. There's some old tile art here, and you can just see these guys sitting around discussing life, as we all do. It's a famous picture from Raphael here, as you can see Aristotle and Plato in the center really discussing reality. Plato's pointing up to the heavens where he believes his great forms and ideas live, and Aristotle's not so sure about that. He's pointing to the ground in reality. But they two together have left a legacy all over education that's still guiding us right now. So he lived in the 5th and 4th centuries BC, but left like I said, a rich legacy here. And part of that is that the actual phrase philosophy is coined by the teacher of Plato named Socrates. And philosophy just means the love of wisdom. If I could try to help here, love is kind of this inspiring notion inside of a human that drives them towards knowledge and truth and understanding. And wisdom is really using that knowledge, truth, and understanding to do the right thing at the right time. And so philosophy is basically what you want for your students. You want them to learn how to grow up, mature, and do the right things. And so this word has really kind of moved all over Western history as the beginning of science, the beginning of ethics, the beginning of statecraft. But we're going to use it today thinking about the first school. And Plato is famed for starting a school that reflected the great ideas of his teacher, Socrates. Socrates never started one, but Plato thought he should get it going. He allowed men and women of the higher classes to attend. Was it for children? We typically think of school for children, but these were for people being trained to serve in some of the highest roles, maybe to form the next governments would be probably something closer to what he thought there. But also just to generally, the more educated the individuals would be within society, the more things you could do. I'll just give you a pretty silly example, but this idea of studying and knowing a lot of stuff just kind of is all over our world. For example, imagine if you went to a grocery store, and when you go in the grocery store, everything has labels on it. And most of you could probably pick up a box and read the back and understand some of it. You could figure out the mathematics for the pricing and just how that general education, that liberal arts education, just allows something like a grocery store to just function without us even really thinking about, which would have been much more difficult back in Plato's day. But the liberal arts education has taken on and just really changed the Western experience as we know it. So his most famous student, you probably have heard his name, was Aristotle, who studied under Plato for at least 20 years. Aristotle went on to set up his own school, which was basically just like a long-running set of field trips where they would just walk around and study the world around them. Somehow, if you put together Plato and Aristotle's models, they kind of make up what we would call our modern liberal arts education today, where you would study multiple topics, often 7 different topics a day. You would visit the gymnasium. You would maybe participate in theater or the arts or music or writing poetry or telling stories. And Plato with Aristotle, again, is kind of the foundation of Western education to this day. Eventually, Aristotle had a very famous student, Alexander the Great. They didn't always get along very well, but Alexander took this model of setting up these Greek-style schools, and when he basically conquered all the way from, let's say, Greece all the way through to, let's say, the Ganges River in India, as he went, he set up these cities that also had schools, and that just kind of took on its own life. Even Trinity Christian College, a liberal arts education, still stands in part of that tradition that's at least, like I said, 2,300 years old. We're going to look at 2 big concepts here that affect not only Plato's philosophy, but eventually even us in the classroom. First, I want to look at this idea that when we're young, we don't really know very much. So we've got ideas and images of things, and maybe we even have strong beliefs about how things work. But eventually, we want to move our students up this list. We want to help them understand. We want to know how to use things, how to get along as an adult. Even in the end, there's all kinds of big ideas we want them to be able to apply in multiple situations, like mathematics, or the idea of what's good or just or true or beautiful. And those things Plato believed existed in a very high form. I'll get to that in a little bit, but we'll get there. So Plato also believed that humans kind of could be divided up into three categories. And part of it, he would say, is kind of how he talked about souls. And the soul of the mind way up here is the thing that should be in charge. It's the most important part of you. It's that part that has the intellect or rationality inside of it. Really kind of can help you guide your life and make wise decisions. But then once you get into here in the middle part, or the middle third of a human, you're running into virtues. Virtues like what you would need perhaps to defend what's important, or to even maybe set really good virtuous habits like temperance, or working through moderation and those kinds of questions, which are very hard for kids to work through, but adults get better as they go. And then you got down here kind of this bottom third is where all your desires are, for rest, for, let's say, sex, or just being happy, or food, drink, whatever it is. These are kind of the more base desires. And as you make your way up, what he would say is that balance is found when your rationality kind of guides your virtues and your virtues guide your appetites. And when you do that, you find a balanced individual. He basically said that the most balanced individuals should be the ones in charge, the ones who can control these bottom parts by using their top part. All of these are necessary for life, and they need to be kept in correct order. And if you think about it, schools really do a lot of the same work. They really want to help kids learn moderation and to have certain attributes and virtues that are going to be really important later when they become adults. And then eventually, we spend a lot of time talking and thinking, a lot of mental activity, right? And so in that sense, we are really forming their rationality, their intellect to kind of guide the process. So Plato has an idea that just basically is probably his most well-known. It's called the idea of the forms. And basically what he thought was, think about this for a second. Let's say you could see a person who had 3 bananas, and then you met another person who had 3 cars, and then you met somebody who was standing by 3 trees, and you could say, what do these things all have in common? And you would get down to the idea of the number 3. They all share the numerical value of 3. So what's more real? Is it the trees, the cookies, or is it the number 3? Well, most of us today would just say, well, 3 cars is real. You can touch them, you see what kind of colors they have, you can measure them, weigh them. But Plato went the direct opposite. Plato said the thing that you can share in common is way more universal and more real. And he began to talk about these ideas that everyone could share, like how to use mathematics and why a sentence makes sense when you use logic. Sorry, why does a sentence even make sense? It has some kind of internal logic that just seems to be there. And why can people understand geometry intuitively and then build things? And eventually, we learn to get along with one another. How is that possible? We learn to share, and you can run a market. How do we do these things? And ask a 5-year-old, put a supermodel and then their great Aunt Tilly in front of them and ask them who's more beautiful. They don't need to be enculturated or trained. They just intuitively know this. And so Plato really wanted to ask these questions like, where is it that we get all of these internal concepts? We don't learn them at school. We just seem to have them somehow. And those things, he really began to start this theory of the forms, that these things are actually real and they actually exist somewhere. No one's exactly sure what Plato meant by them, but in some ways they activate us. We spend our days, all of our days, thinking and doing these things. We go around, we determine how long it's going to take. We're constantly worried about what's right. And when you go to the store, that you pay for what you get. We're all searching for things that inspire us. and move our souls. And we also just, we want what's good for our family and our kids, and we want what's good for our students. So what he basically said is that your soul is eternal, and that your soul comes from somewhere where all of these things exist, these forms. You would usually just say in the heavens that they exist, but really what education is not learning these things, but they're already there. A good teacher finds a way to kind of like help you remember these things and then live them out and practice them and bring them to your family and your city eventually. And when you can do that, you will have strength and hope and all kinds of good things you couldn't even imagine. So, real school doesn't teach you something, it helps you remember the things that are already built right into your soul. And in the end, the true individuals who should be ruling are the ones who have this true knowledge. They actually have a good idea of what to do with all of these great forms and concepts and ideals, and they can bring them out. And not only will it bring balance to their own bodies, but eventually will bring balance to all the people they rule over. That's kind of Plato's big hope. So just kind of to bring it all home, these souls are immortal. And they come from the same place where all of these great ideas and forms are. What school is meant to do is to kind of reawaken them, to help people remember them and live into them. So again, even when you learn how to treat your neighbor, how to get along with people, how to form a government, you're remembering what's already there. It's not like you're actually learning it. It's not like you're going to go memorize a bunch of definitions, but you start doing this right away when you're a kid playing with your friends in the backyard. And when kids get to school, they're going to learn the rules because you assume they've got some decent idea of how this should work. And you awaken them by giving them opportunities to do that. And in the end, if you can form your city out of well-awoken or well-remembered citizens, well, your city's going to be insanely strong and hard to overcome, and your enemies will not defeat you. And this Greek model really just spread. Alexander the Great thought it was the best thing ever, and he took it and just conquered half the known world and spread governments and school systems that are still kind of just echoing out even in this class right now. In the end, I'm going to leave you with two thoughts. Plato was haunted that these innate ideas, these forms, are so hard to bring about that we very rarely do them ever even close to perfect. And Plato's teacher, Socrates, was put on trial for basically two crimes, as the city of Athens said, that he corrupted the youth and that he was an atheist. By atheist means he didn't ascribe as much glory to the normal Greek pantheon as he should, Zeus and all of his crazy brothers and sisters and his parents. And he spent more time believing that perhaps there was just one mind that brought everything together, not several gods, but that those other little gods, all those Zeus and Kronos, those are all below this one mind, this goodness with a capital G, this truth with a capital T, and that in the end we seek unity. Not exactly sure how that works, but think about the American project you're living. We're all trying to figure out how to work together. What is just, what is true, what is right, and aren't you going to spend a ton of time in your classroom doing that with your students, trying to bring them together by things that unify them, like an innate sense of goodness and truth and beauty, and justice. So Plato has left his mark all over not only politics and ethics, but of course he's the first guy to really set up classrooms. And we still to this day try to find things that unify us instead of what divides us. We try to practice justice. And I hope this was helpful for you. If it inspired you, please watch other videos. Please just read. But I hope this is helpful for your paper writing.